I wanted to talk to you today about another one of my pearls, someone who's been a pearl in my life for more years than anyone else. And that would be my daddy. You know, when I look at the situation we find our world in today, it's very often that we hear of people who are not model daddies and who are not the kind of daddy anyone would want to have. And I wish that I could tell you, I wish I could tell him what a pearl he is. My daddy's in heaven now, but I think of him every day, just like I do other family members who have gone. But I want to tell you in what ways he was different and how he influenced my life. He was remarkable. My daddy was remarkable. He served in World War II. And at one point in time, the ship was given leave while they came into somewhere in Washington for repairs. So Daddy sent a telegram to my grandpa and grandma Lucky, told them he would be coming home and when. And when my grandparents got the telegram, they thought that it was a telegram to report his death. They didn't really understand how things worked. And maybe back then they didn't send officers to inform you of a death. I don't know. But when my daddy got there, several weeks later, there was the telegram sitting on the table, unopened. Daddy was the only boy. His baby sister had died because the three of them managed to get into a mailing that came and had samples in it. Unfortunately, the samples were not chocolate that the children thought. My daddy's baby sister was 2. His older sister was around 5 or 6, and Daddy was somewhere in between. And they ate the candy that came in the mail. And back then they did not have pumps in emergency situations for everyone who might have needed their stomach pumped. And while they were saving the lives of my daddy and my aunt Lucille, my little aunt Helen passed away at age 2. Very sad. So my dad grew up as the only boy in the family, a treasured boy, and to have lost him, my grandparents would have been devastated, of course. But my dad went on to get shrapnel in his legs during the war and maybe elsewhere, for all I know. But my mother did not really want him to talk about it, and he didn't. But the shrapnel, of course, would work its way out of where it was lodged. And I think it could not have been easy for my dad. But he wasn't one to make a scene. He didn't even go to a VA hospital until he was late 60s, in his late 60s. He didn't want to make a scene. It was important to him not to make a scene and not to be dependent on anyone. There are so many stories I could tell you about my dad because he was made out of everything that's right. I never had to worry. My dad never touched me inappropriately. My dad never swore. My dad was so good that he would have been a model for some younger men today who could use a model. But at any rate, my dad was a pastor. He was an ordained minister. He became one when he was in his about late 20s, I believe. And he had the opinion that God knows these things and God will repay. You know, when my mother passed away, my daddy drove with the ambulance to take her about 60 miles in a storm. They could not fly in to get my mother from the hospital where she was because of bad weather. So my dad and the ambulance drove, I understand, on ice to get to a city where a plane could land. The plane took my mother on to Wichita to the hospital, and my daddy followed in the car. He didn't know when he arrived, but they took him aside and told him that my mother had passed away en route. My mother had never been on an airplane. I'm sure she was terrified, and I don't know to what extent they sedated her. And I suppose we could have had a lawsuit which would have, we could have alleged that she should have been transferred long before she was from that hospital. Instead of ruling out heart disease, the doctor had been family doctor for a number of my relatives who had instant heart attacks. She had a history of uncles and grandpa, heart attack, just one, and gone. So they had kept her in the hospital for almost a week to, quote, rule out gallbladder disease. But my dad would say, God knows these things, and he'll take care of it. We don't have to. It's a different world back then, wasn't it? Now, when my daddy got to Wichita, he asked if he could take my mother back home, which is like 3 hours drive. And they gave him permission to take my mother. It was not across a state line or anything, and I don't know whether it could even be done today. But he told me that he talked to her all the way home. He was tough, but he was such a friendly guy. Everybody loved him. They just loved my dad. And I can tell you that when my grandmother passed away, she was cleared for surgery, but then she passed away in surgery, and the doctors came out and told us, oh, she started throwing a few PVCs and passed away. And I suppose we could have challenged that. We could have alleged that the doctors were not giving her standard care. But Daddy said, God knows these things. And nobody brought a lawsuit. Maybe not everybody trusted God back then, and maybe they don't today. But I like the idea that God knows these things. And my dad was made of the right stuff. He was a sincere breadwinner. We never had too much, but they gave me all they had, and then they gave my brother all they had when they raised him as well. And all I have is good to say about my parents. The only thing I'd like to remind you is that there will be pearls in your life. And if you get a chance, tell them today that they are a pearl. How much they mean to you, what a gem they are, how much they've contributed to who you are today. I'm not sure. I think I have a picture of my mom and dad I can show you. Just a moment. I was going to use this for something else, and it's sitting right here. This is my mom and daddy. My mom always used to say, I'm never going to visit you because you're going to have the dirtiest house in town. Well, I would like my mom and my dad to come visit me. I don't quite have the dirtiest house in town, but who knows? I guess all things are relative. Anyway, there's someone in your life that you need to talk to today. Tell them what a pearl they are. I look forward to telling you more about pearls in my family, because there's many more. And I also have some pearls who are great friends. I can't wait to tell you about Paul the painter. He's a great pearl. Just remember, whatever happens, you don't have to retaliate. You don't have to retaliate. God knows these things. If you believe there's a God, then you have to believe He knows these things. Bye-bye now.